Good morning. I'm glad you can devote some time to worship this Sunday. This Sunday is one of the Sundays following Easter, and so we join with the rest of the church worldwide as we look towards the story of Thomas in the upper room. We find this story in John chapter 20, and we read, "Now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my fingers where the nails were and put my hands into his side, I will not believe it.' A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, 'Peace be with you.' Then he said to Thomas, 'Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe.' And Thomas said to him, 'My Lord and my God.'" I grew up near a major city. I grew up near Chicago. And so there were many times when I was younger that go into the city. And I was fairly used to the noise and the hustle and bustle of walking down Michigan Avenue. And yet, I must say that driving into the city is still something I can get a little bit tense if I'm doing. Even with some basic familiarity with the city. Even with instantly updating Google Maps directions running right in front of me, even with someone to help me try to look where I'm going, full tank of gas, plenty of time to get there, I can get a little bit tense. Though if I'm being honest, my wife would say I'm getting far more than a little bit tense. I can get very problem focused, you might say. If I haven't had time to prepare, if I haven't had time to take a look at a map and like a paper map and refamiliarize myself with the order of the streets, if I make a wrong turn or if I'm running short on time, I can go from a little bit tense to maybe even frazzled. I'd be loath to admit it, but I might get just a touch frazzled. A little bit tense, very kind of quiet. I invite you to ponder the last time you had such a moment, whether it was driving into the city and handling the driving and you were going somewhere you haven't been before, or whether it was dealing with a family situation that you did not want to deal with, or something at work went off the rails. Like, what? Think about the last times you were tense, maybe even frazzled. I want you to take a moment to remember how that feels. Do you kind of get a headache right there? You just have that headache, or you feel yourself like literally tensing up, or tapping your foot, or we all have the things we do, those things we do when we get really tense. Now I want you to imagine that you're in a room full of people who are just as tense. And now we're ready to join the disciples. The disciples are in the upper room. Let's think about what they've gone through. Like when we find them in this reading, it tells us that they are in the upper room and they have the door locked because they're afraid. Well, why are they afraid? Let's go back to how they got into the city. There were 12 of them, and they enter the city. And they've been in the city a few times in their lives, but this is different. A lot of people there, a lot of people speaking languages they don't know. A lot of Roman guards. Roman guards are going to stab first and ask questions later, if they bother to ask questions. They're empowered to stab first and just leave it at that to maintain control. Not to maintain peace. Peace would be a different matter. They're there to maintain control. And so it's a very tense place. It's loud. The smells are different than they're used to. They can't see the sky like they're used to out in the country. And they've entered the city on Palm Sunday. Well, we call it Palm Sunday. They would have called it the week before Passover. And they've entered, not just going in with Jesus with a crowd. They've gone in surrounded by a crowd chanting, "Alleluia, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," singing. And they've gone to the temple, where there are a lot of those Roman guards, these stab first, questions later guards. And those guards now know what they look like, because they've gone back day after day with Jesus to preach and argue and debate in the temple, and people are getting angry at Jesus, and they're there with him, and so they are, well, Jesus' disciples. at that point, otherwise known as targets. Right? They're probably, if they're wise, worried that if they go outside of this room, people are going to know who they are, and it's going to go sideways. You just remember, right? Peter tries to pass himself off as, no, I'm not a disciple. And multiple people come up to him and says, hey, weren't you with Jesus? Like, they're known figures. People have seen them. They know who they are, right? So they have spent this week with Jesus, who was then arrested, put on trial, crucified, dead, and buried. And now here they are. Jesus was crucified on Friday. Here they are 3 days later. They're in a room. They have locked the door because they are afraid. The 11 of them, because Judas is gone. Oh yes, that does add to the tension. One of them turned out to be a snake in the grass, was a traitor. And that's got to be scary, right? And so here they are. They're scared. They're tense. And then Jesus walks in. And he tells them the first thing they need to hear, peace. Because they don't have any right then. They're frazzled. They're like jittery beyond all, like, ah, right? And so they're frazzled, and Jesus shows up and looks around, sees them, and says, oh, dudes, my dudes, peace, chill, relax. We're good, right? And he's telling them this, like, whew. Can you imagine the way that room would have deflated? The only thing I can compare it to is when I've been waiting with families and in hospitals as loved ones are having major surgery, and the doctor comes out and tells them it's going to be okay, and the way that everyone just sort of like deflates, and the tension you didn't realize people were having lets go. And then Jesus leaves. Why does he leave? We don't know. Why did he show up exactly when he did? We don't know. And then Thomas returns. Where has Thomas been? Well, Thomas has been off doing things, because that's what Thomas does. Thomas is the one who says, as they're about to go up into Jerusalem, Thomas says, you know what? If we're going to die with them, let's do it. Let's just go to Jerusalem, and if we're going to die with them, we'll die with them. Let's go do something, right? Thomas is the guy. They probably kicked him out because over the last 24 hours, he's probably been cleaning and tidying and scrubbing and just doing things. And they probably said, Thomas, we need food. You need to do something. So, like, go get us groceries or something. Don't get killed. Avoid the guards. Come back when you're done. Like, Thomas is the guy who just has to keep on doing things, as far as I can tell from reading scripture and the clues that we get to his personality, right? So Thomas wasn't there. And so he comes back. He rolls in with the groceries so they can have something to eat. And they say, Thomas, Jesus was here. And he goes, really? I don't buy it. I'm going to have to touch him if I'm going to believe it. And they tell him, no, really. And Thomas says, no, really, I'm going to have to touch it. Right? And so Jesus shows up again a week later. Why does Jesus show up again a week later? Well, Jesus showed up the first time on Sunday, crucified Friday. 3 days later, Sunday shows up to the disciples on the first day of the week, on Sunday. Sunday is the first day of the week. The seventh day of the week, Shabbat, Sabbath, is Saturday in the Jewish tradition. Jesus was resurrected on Sunday, so that's why we worship on Sunday. So Jesus shows up 7 days later on the day, the seventh, 7 days later, the next first day of the week. I guess that'd be why it happens. I don't know. And he shows up, and he says to Thomas, here I am. And Thomas says to him, my Lord and my God. You see, Thomas had the time and the space to ask his questions, to grapple with his doubt, his concerns, and then he makes the most clear-cut confession of faith in the Bible. My Lord and my God. My Lord, the one who's in charge, Lord, right? And God, the one who created all. This is the most clear statement of who Jesus is in the Bible. This is the moment that the church turns to Easter after Easter. It is always the recommended reading right after Easter. In the same way that Christmas, the recommended reading is reading Luke 1, and you're reading about the birth of Jesus. And Easter, you're reading about the resurrection. Like, this is the reading that the church turns to right after Easter every year, and it has been that way for centuries. And why does the church do that? Like, why is it so important that we look at Thomas? To answer that, and at least the way I think we can answer it this year, let me ask a different question. What type of trees survive storms? Are they the trees that are stiff, rigid? Or are the trees that survive the storms, are they the trees that have a little bit of give? They can sway. Right? The answer to that question is the same one as when we have to build a building that is tall and will be exposed to vast winds, great winds and storms, building skyscrapers. Do we build them so that they are tight and stiff and they go up straight and they will not move? Or do we move them so that there is some sway to them? Right? Tall skyscrapers can move 6 to 7 feet in different directions to cope and handle with the wind. And as we're building skyscrapers today, they'll take one of the top floors and the whole floor they'll put a weight on it, and the weight will be on a pendulum that goes to the top of the building, and that weight can move, because if you're going to have to move the mass of the building in response to the wind, you might as well plan to move the pendulum so that if you move the pendulum, you don't have to build the frame of the building, and so that way if you're in the building, you don't have to fill the building, move 6 feet this way, which I think would be a little bit disturbing. I don't think I'd ever want to actually live in a skyscraper, but that's how we do it. If we want things to build, we want to build things that are going to take the storms. We don't build them to be stiff. We build them to be flexible, because to be strong is to have flexibility. The plants, the trees that survive are the ones that are flexible, not the ones that are stiff. I think it is the same when it comes to faith. A strong faith is not stiff. A strong faith is flexible enough to weather the storm, to take questions, to keep looking to Jesus, and on the other side of those questions, to continue to be able to declare, my Lord and my God, I'm still going to follow you. And if you want to ask what type of questions are I talking about, like the storms of life, like there are questions we come to. We can talk about like interesting and challenging questions. How do I read Genesis and understand evolution? Like that's a fascinating question. Why do I need the church to follow Jesus? Great question. How do I know I can trust the Bible? What does history have to say about King David? How do we understand the Jewish people to be chosen after the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus? Like great questions. I can give you a whole list. I can give you lots more questions. Those questions are not the storms of life. The storms of life are questions like, how do I trust God when cancer has just killed someone I love? Whoo, yep, that's a question. That's a storm. And if we try to be stiff like this, I'm just going to hold on to my faith and pretend like, and try to hold on to my faith like nothing has changed, that doesn't work. It just doesn't. How we answer such a question of how do I understand the existence of evil in the world is going to shift and change once I've had a run-in with cancer that has killed someone that I love. That's a storm that's going to shift, and we've got to have some flexibility to get through it. All right? Thomas, to go back to Thomas is grappling with one of these types of like storm questions. Can I believe and trust in Jesus? The dude who I have followed for multiple years, who I believe to be connected to God, somehow can't exactly figure it out. Can I trust and believe in him? Right? What's going on here? Right? And when Thomas says that when Jesus comes back to him and says, "Here I am," Thomas is able to say, "My Lord and my God," right? He has come through the other side of the storm and he meets Jesus and he can say, "My Lord and my God," and his faith, he has allowed it to be flexible and it's going to last. It is surviving the storm. That is not to say that Thomas has it all figured out. Thomas does not understand everything that has just happened. He knows that Jesus taught and healed. He knows that Jesus was crucified. He knows that Jesus is standing right here before him. Thomas doesn't know all the details, but he knows enough. And I greatly appreciate that. Thomas has the faith of knowing enough. He doesn't know everything, but he knows enough to act on, enough to follow. In these days, this Easter season, we're pondering what the resurrection means for how we live as followers of Jesus today. And like Thomas, we have confessed, "My Lord and my God." And like Thomas, we understand some, but we do not understand all. But what we understand, it's enough. And we're used to this if you think about it. Like, we are used to making decisions based upon enough information. Think about all the important decisions that we have made in our lives, where we did not have all the information, we had enough to make a decision. Taking a job. Do you know how the job's going to work out? Do you know if you're actually going to get along with your boss? Nope, but you got to pick. So you pick based on having as much information as you can have. Taking a job, picking a college, choosing a medical treatment for a serious condition. That's always fun. Well, could this work? Well, it'll probably work, but we can't promise anything. Like, that's hard, all right? Getting married, having kids, moving, making healthcare decisions involving elderly family members. Like, we make decisions based upon knowing as much as we can know, knowing enough. But we never have all the information. There are always questions that we don't have complete answers to. What we do is we get enough information to act on, and then we act on what we know. Because even if we don't act, to not act is an action. It's a decision, right? And once we decide, we move on, and when life changes, we can either insist that nothing change, or we learn the lesson of Thomas, and we are flexible. We roll with it. I think it is important to notice that this is not an individual activity either. So Thomas is, as he's grappling with this, like he has a week. He has 7 days to grapple with, like, they're saying Jesus, and I'm thinking, like, I saw the dude dead, but he's saying, like, he's grappling with this, right? Think about the weirdness of being in that room, because they're in different places. Thomas is still in the middle of the storm. For the other 10, they're on the other side of the storm. They're doing great. They're ready to move on with what's next, right? We are going to be in different places at different times. There are going to be moments when, as a church, we're going to be a group of people where some of us are going through the worst storms of our lives and some of us are sitting pretty and doing fine. It is okay to be questioning and to be struggling, and it's okay to be at peace, and it's okay for those two people to be sitting next to each other singing the same hymn. Once Jesus returned, and Thomas has made his decision, he acts on it. Right? He confesses, my Lord and my God. And that's where we are at, to do the same. Not because we are done questioning, because we are never done questioning. We never have it all figured out. But because now we have enough to go on. That Jesus taught, healed, forgave, and rose again, and we can follow him wherever he leads. And so this Easter season is both a time of declaring what we hold on to, that he is risen, and it's a time in which we can dream about where we might go, question what we don't yet understand, ponder what we haven't yet experienced, and know that each of us can be in different places doing this at different times, all in the same church, all following Jesus towards his kingdom together. Amen.